A quiet life in the world of the Yakuza is a lie. For Maya Johnson, one act of loyalty to the dead became an act of defiance against Kaito Tanaka, the cold-hearted Oyabun of Tokyo. She wasn't meant to survive his wrath, yet she became the singular obsession of a man consumed by vengeance. To hold his daughter's final secret meant risking everything: her career, her safety, her freedom. But when loyalty collides with absolute power, survival depends on a heart that suddenly refuses to let go. Will she break under the pressure of his power? Or will she use the truth to tame the most dangerous man in Tokyo? Hit the subscribe button now to follow every tense moment of this story. Now, let's begin. The evening was alive with the soft, contained energy of a gallery opening in Tokyo's Shinjuku district. Muted jazz bled through the air, mixing with the sharp aroma of espresso and canvas. Inside the gallery, the walls glowed under focused spotlights, illuminating abstract pieces that required as much intellect to decipher as they did vision. Maya Johnson moved through the crowd, her presence commanding attention even in the quiet world of art. An African-American analyst by trade and an artist by passion, her black dress contrasted sharply with the vibrant canvases. Much like her ordered, analytical life contrasted with the chaos that brewed beneath Tokyo's neon surface. This gallery, run by a close-knit group of expats and local independents, was her safe space, her passion, her proud escape. She wiped her hands on a napkin, adjusting the lighting over a piece that symbolized fractured peace. "That reporter is asking about the security situation again, Maya," whispered her young colleague, Kenji, his voice tight as he glanced toward the double glass doors. The subtle atmosphere of intellectual calm was instantly shattered. The sound didn't come from the music. It was the chilling, unmistakable scrape of polished leather on marble as the crowd near the entrance parted in unnatural silence. The hushed reverence, usually reserved for art, vanished. Kaito Tanaka, the man whose name ruled the city's underbelly, stood framed in the doorway. He was immaculate in a tailored black suit, his stillness conveying a threat far greater than any shout. Beside him, two enormous silent men in dark clothes moved like shadows. Kaito didn't look at the art. His cold, predatory gaze scanned the room until it locked onto Maya. He radiated raw, visible grief and consuming vengeance. A man who had lost everything and was hunting the perceived architects of his pain. He didn't approach the art. He strode toward a quiet corner where several members of Maya's expat community were gathered, chatting nervously. He didn't ask questions. "Cease your activities here. You have 2 hours to clear out." Kaito's voice was low, precise, and laced with absolute, terrifying authority. He didn't look at Maya, but his words were a declaration of war against her community, his first salvo in his campaign of terror. His look promised that any resistance would be met with swift, lethal finality. Maya felt the fear, the chilling reality of the man who had ordered the economic ruin of rivals. She knew challenging him meant signing her own death warrant. Yet the unwavering loyalty to her friend, Sora, was a burning command. She moved forward, placing herself directly in Kaito's path. "You are making a mistake, Oyabun," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but steel-edged. Her gaze locked on his. "The people here are not responsible for your grief." Kaito finally met her eyes, his cold, obsidian gaze now alight with lethal surprise. He took one step closer, his breath hot on her ear. "Who are you to tell me the nature of my vengeance?" Maya stood taller, summoning every ounce of her resolve. "I am the keeper of your daughter's secret, and you have chosen the wrong enemy. You need me." Kaito's face transformed. The shock was instantaneous, melting into a focused, lethal curiosity and consuming rage. Maya Johnson had just issued a direct challenge, and in that single, decisive moment, she had earned his full attention, marking herself not for destruction, but for a dangerous, irreversible obsession. The air in the gallery was thick and hot, not from the climate control, but from the sudden, profound silence. Every eye in the room was fixed on the man who had just delivered the eviction notice, and on the woman who had dared to block his path. Kaito Tanaka hadn't moved since Maya spoke, his eyes dark and deep-set like old stones, absorbing her. He seemed less surprised by her identity than by her temerity. He was used to terror. Defiance was a novelty. He took a slow step forward, forcing her to hold her ground, testing the resolve he saw flickering beneath her fear. His tailored suit was a shield of wealth, his presence an act of lethal arrogance. "I gave the order to clear out," Kaito stated, the noise level in the room having dropped so completely that the whisper of his silk tie on his shirt was audible. "The community that shielded the truth of Sora's death will pay the price for their negligence. It is a matter of respect, and mine is absolute." Maya's throat was dry, her crimson dress suddenly feeling less like elegant armor and more like a spotlight target. The sight of Kaito, the raw grief simmering beneath his disciplined fury, threatened to break her. This was the man who had taught her best friend how to tie her shoes, the man whose hands she remembered as gentle before they became instruments of the Yakuza's will. She pushed the memory down, replacing it with Sora's final, terrified plea. "Your price is unjust," Maya said, her voice stronger this time, carrying the weight of the immense, dangerous truth she carried. "You seek respect through destruction. You want the truth, but you choose blindness. You have destroyed livelihoods over a lie." One of Kaito's bodyguards shifted, his hand tightening near his jacket interior. Kaito simply raised a hand, stopping the man with a silent, terrifying command. His focus never left Maya. He was intrigued, a sensation that had been deadened by grief for months. This woman, standing against the sheer force of his loss, was behaving like a fool or a queen. "You believe you are powerful because you speak to me of justice," Kaito drawled, a dark amusement coloring his voice for the first time. "I am the only justice in this city. Leave before you become a casualty of your own foolish nobility." "I am not noble, Oyabun. I am loyal," she countered, gripping the secret tighter. "And you are mistaken about Sora. You are wrong about the enemies who killed her, and you are wrong about the truth. I know why she died." The shift was immediate. The amusement vanished, replaced by an intensity that was electric, possessing. It was the same look of focused rage that led to severed contracts and ruined men, but it was now directed entirely at her. This was the exact moment the plot demanded, the point of no return. Kaito leaned in close, his face blurring the elegant structure of her profile in a terrifying intimacy. "You have 20 seconds to give me the name," he hissed, his voice dangerously soft. "The truth, Maya Johnson, or the destruction of your gallery will be the least of your concerns." Maya looked back at the cold, beautiful rage in his eyes and made the only move that could protect her people. "You will not destroy my life, Kaito Tanaka, because if you do, the secret dies with me, and you will never find peace." She had drawn the line, not with a lie, but with a bargain. The truth was her shield, and the price of his closure had just become her survival. Kaito straightened, his chest heaving once beneath the tailored wool. He looked at her, not with anger, but with an agonizing, possessive fixation. The order was not given to strike. It was given to wait. "Take her," he commanded, his voice a tight coil of steel, not to his men, but to the silence of the room. "She is not to be harmed. She is not to leave the district. She is mine now. The hunt is over. The extraction begins." The air in the Oyabun's fortress had gone cold and utterly silent after Maya spoke those 5 words. "You need me." Kaito Tanaka's rage, which had been a visible, consuming fire moments before, suddenly froze, crystallizing into something more dangerous, lethal concentration. He stood over her, his eyes the eyes of the man in the tailored suit, who was mourning and murdering in equal measure, drilling into her face. He did not touch her, did not yell, but the pressure in the small space became physical, like being held underwater. "You believe a desperate plea gives you immunity in my home, woman?" His voice was a flat, silken threat. "It gives me leverage in your grief. Maya countered, her voice now steady. She had thrown her desperate challenge, and there was no going back. You want to know how Sora died, Oyabun? Not just where, but why. And I am the only person left who can give you that truth. Your path of vengeance is blind. You've hurt innocent people. If you kill me now, you will never get closure. You will only be left with ruin. That was the crucial moment. Kaito saw the unshakable loyalty in her eyes, the same loyalty Sora had possessed. He saw not a frightened victim, but a shield, planted firmly to protect a truth more devastating than his revenge. With a slow, grinding inhale, he stepped back, the pressure in the room dissipating like steam. "Take her!" he commanded, his eyes still fixed on her. "Not to a cell, not to the guards, to the top-floor guest suite. She stays until I decide what payment I extract for her defiance and for her information." Maya didn't know if the guest suite was a privilege or a gilded cage, but she knew she was alive. She had bought time, but at the cost of her freedom. Over the next few days, Kaito began his meticulous, chilling retaliation. He didn't come to her, nor did he send enforcers. Instead, the siege was subtle, pervasive, and designed to squeeze her until the secret popped out. Her apartment was cleared out, her belongings carefully packed and stored. Her bank accounts were not emptied, but frozen, leaving her unable to access her funds, yet unable to claim theft. Her professional existence, the analysis firm she worked for, received a polite, anonymous notification of security risk, and she was instantaneously suspended. He was suffocating her life outside the walls of his fortress, forcing her to realize how easily he could erase her. She was utterly isolated in his sterile, luxurious prison. Outside, she knew the campaign against her community had stalled, but she also knew that the pause was temporary. It depended entirely on her. Kaito had hoped that the solitude, the fear, and the lack of control would make her beg to reveal the secret just to escape his golden cage. He was wrong. The isolation only hardened her resolve. She spent her days writing and sketching, reinforcing her memory of Sora's final words, ensuring the truth remained pure and uncorrupted. Her ultimate leverage, the more he took from her, the more she clung to the one thing he desperately craved. Kaito Tanaka had planned to crush her will. Instead, her unbreakable resistance only fueled his desperate curiosity, turning a calculated hostage situation into the genesis of a much darker, forbidden fascination. The black limousine that had become a phantom of Kaito Tanaka's wrath was gone, but the silence it left behind was louder than any threat. Maya's gallery was technically open. The lights were on, and the espresso machine hissed, yet the air was thick with a new, crippling paralysis. It had been 4 days since Kaito's men had shuttered the import channels for her ceramics and silks, and 2 days since the quiet, chilling word had spread: Tanaka's target. No one would rent her space, no one would speak to her suppliers, and no one from the local community would cross her threshold. Her business was a corpse, standing upright. Yet Maya still came every morning. She came not to salvage what was gone, but because leaving would be surrender. She kept the windows gleaming and the counter spotless, the crimson of her sharp dress a flag of defiance in the quiet space. Kaito had expected her to beg, to fold under the pressure he wielded as effortlessly as breathing. He expected her loyalty to her dead friend, Sora, to snap under the weight of her living community. He expected Maya Johnson to be like every other obstacle removed, broken or bought. But Kaito had only achieved the first 2/3 of his objective. He had isolated her, and he had crippled her livelihood. He had not, and could not, take the secret. He had miscalculated the power of a woman who was driven by something greater than profit or fear. Up in his vast, steel and glass Oyabun's office overlooking the city, Kaito was left with a strange, infuriating stalemate. His men were confused. The revenge was stalled. They had delivered the order to break the woman, and she had simply refused to be broken. His Komon advisor, a man who lived by ruthless efficiency, had twice inquired if they should escalate to physical removal. Kaito had shot the suggestion down with a cold stare that promised a lifetime of pain. He couldn't kill her, not when she held the only key to peace with his daughter's ghost. His rage, which had been a clear, guiding fire aimed at destruction, was now a confused, smoldering heat aimed entirely at Maya herself. Why was she still there? Why did she continue to endure the silence and the ruin he had inflicted? Her resistance wasn't just defiance. It was a testament to the unyielding depth of her loyalty to Sora, the same loyalty Kaito himself felt but had twisted into vengeance. It fascinated him. Kaito found himself checking the intelligence reports, not for the status of his siege, but for her routines. What did she eat? Where did she walk? How did she look when she locked up the empty gallery at night? The surveillance became less a tool of war and more a necessity of observation. The raw need to extract the truth began to bleed into a possessive fascination for the one person in Tokyo who looked him in the eye and refused to blink. He had meant to crush her, but by forcing her to choose between the secret and survival, he had inadvertently highlighted her extraordinary strength. He had traded immediate vengeance for the slow, agonizing realization that the black woman who held his daughter's secret was the single, powerful exception to every rule of his empire. The lethal interest in her grew daily, morphing into a dangerous, forbidden obsession that left the Oyabun paralyzed, his power useless against her quiet, defiant spirit. The first casualty of Maya's defiance wasn't her life, but her peace. 2 weeks had passed since she had thrown the truth of Sora's death like a gauntlet at Kaito Tanaka's feet, and the response was an unsettling silence. The pressure on her community had inexplicably evaporated, but the pressure on Maya herself had become a precise, invisible force. She felt watched constantly, not by clumsy thugs, but by professionals, men who blended into the Tokyo skyline, their presence a soft, persistent thrum against the glass of her composure. She noticed the new faces, first men who paid for coffee at the same time every morning, who lingered outside the entrance to her office building, their expensive coats blending into the financial district. They were spies, but they weren't collecting information for an attack. They were collecting information for an obsession. One damp, late afternoon, Maya was collecting a new batch of canvas prints from her supplier near Shibuya. The alley was narrow and dark, smelling of exhaust and rain. She fumbled with the key to her small storage unit when a figure detached itself from the shadow of a freight container. It was Kaito. He wasn't in his tailored business suit tonight. He wore dark, precise street clothes, a black turtleneck, and a long charcoal jacket, making him look less like a mafia boss and more like a predator out of its cage. His eyes, usually cold mirrors, held a strange, unsettling fire. "You've stopped the attack on the community," Maya stated, ignoring the frantic hammering of her own heart. Why? Afraid of disturbing the secret? Kaito didn't move, the intensity of his gaze doing the talking. "The cost of my former vengeance was predictable. Yours is not." His voice was low, possessing the dangerous calm of a volcano before an eruption. "I find myself interested in a woman who uses the grief of a man like me as her defense. It is highly unorthodox." Maya felt the dangerous shift. His aggression had evolved into a twisted form of intrigue. He was no longer trying to crush her. He was dissecting her. "Interest is a luxury you cannot afford, Oyabun. Not while you wear the ring of my friend's father," she countered, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He took a slow step closer, closing the distance until the damp night air seemed to thicken around them. "I prefer watching you, Maya Johnson. Watching your spirit refuse to break. I prefer seeing the defiance in your eyes to the fear in the faces of those useless puppets I chased before." He placed a single gloved hand against the rough brick wall beside her head, trapping her with sheer proximity and will, not force. He inhaled slowly, a gesture of almost animalistic contemplation. "I have not decided what I want. Closure, perhaps. Vengeance, certainly. But now, you are entangled with both. Tell me the secret. Give me peace." Maya leaned back against the wall, refusing to lean into him. The secret is payment for my people's safety, Kaito, not a gift for your peace. A shadow of a smile, unsettling and possessive, touched his lips. You mistake my hesitation for weakness. It is merely a pause, a curiosity. You interest me, Maya. And that, in my world, is far more terrifying than any threat. Sleep well, knowing I am still deciding your fate. He pushed off the wall and melted back into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Maya trembling, realizing she was no longer dealing with a temporary enemy, but a permanent, terrifying obsession. The truth was a heavy, dangerous thing, and Maya wore it like a lead coat in the humid Tokyo summer. Kaito Tanaka's vengeance had stalled. That was the simple, terrifying fact. He had withdrawn his forces from her community and lifted the immediate pressure on their financial sources. The fear, however, lingered, thick and suffocating, because the king of the Yakuza was now silent. His silence was the sound of a predator circling, no longer focused on the flock, but fixated entirely on the single creature that held its peace. It started subtly. Maya first noticed the new faces at her gallery, not the anxious faces of the expat community, but the blank, polished expressions of men who paid in crisp, sequential bills and who never, ever looked at the art. They came, they stood, they watched her, and they vanished. They were Kaito's eyes, reporting back on her routine, her contacts, her every movement. His power had transformed from outright assault to a deep, unnerving surveillance, suggesting his interest had moved beyond simple revenge to something more personalized and much more consuming. One evening, after she closed the gallery, the shadows shifted. It was an alley far from her usual route, dimly lit by a failing neon sign advertising cheap noodles. He stepped out of the darkness alone. No bodyguards, no black cars idling, just Kaito Tanaka in a simple black cashmere sweater instead of his tailored suit, blending into the night like a seasoned hunter. The shock was enough to freeze the breath in her lungs. "You're a creature of habit, Maya Johnson." His voice was low, devoid of the rage that had defined their last meeting, replaced by a deep, resonant quality that vibrated with suppressed tension. The coffee shop at 8 a.m., the gym at 6 p.m. You choose loyalty over fear. An admirable and foolish quality. You should know better than to ambush me, Oyabun, Maya managed. Though her heart hammered against her ribs, she kept her hand steady, refusing to retreat. It will only confirm that I was right to keep the secret. He took a slow step closer, his eyes catching the limited light, shining with an unnerving intensity that made her skin prickle. You interest me, Maya. You resist the absolute power of the city, and yet you stand here, alone, speaking to its ruler. His lips barely moved, but the words carried the weight of a decree. I no longer care about your community. They are irrelevant. I care about what you hold. I prefer watching you fight. It's enlightening. He didn't touch her, but his proximity was a physical force, tightening the air around them. He leaned in, close enough for her to catch the expensive scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and smoke. I haven't decided what I want, he confessed, the statement chilling her more deeply than any overt threat. The truth, or the pleasure of breaking the only person who hasn't broken yet? He straightened, a ghost of a smile touching his mouth, before melting back into the shadows, leaving Maya standing in the alley, realizing the nature of the threat had mutated. It was no longer about her life. It was about her submission, and that was a far more terrifying prospect. Kaito's dangerous attraction had begun. The air inside Maya's small, functional studio apartment had grown heavy, thick with the silence of fear. Maya didn't need Kaito's men to break down her door to know she was at her lowest point. He had simply cut the ground from beneath her. Just last week, her most important contact at the Tokyo Art Council, a man who had championed her gallery, had suddenly resigned, leaving only a terse, cryptic note about unavoidable restructuring. Her analytical consultancy clients, once steady, were now pulling out, citing unforeseen legal complications. Kaito wasn't sending threats anymore. He was sending quiet economic death. She hadn't heard from Kenji, her young colleague, in 3 days. He'd quit, not with anger, but with a plea for survival. A note left on her work table explaining that he couldn't risk his family anymore. Every call now went straight to voicemail. Every delivery truck turned away. She was truly alone. Maya stood in the center of her apartment, the deep crimson dress she usually reserved for opening nights, looking tragically out of place against the peeling paint of her small kitchen. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that settled in the bones and chilled the blood, yet her resolve remained unbroken. She had not opened her gallery in 2 days. The doors remained locked, a symbolic surrender that tore at her spirit. But she knew continuing would only put more people at risk. She had fought him. She had cursed him. She had resisted his veiled threats and his cold, possessive gaze. But she could not fight the necessity of survival for those she cared about. The secret, her shield, had now become a chain, tightening around her solitary neck. She was at her breaking point, the Oyabun having successfully cleared the field. There was nowhere left to run, and no one left to hide behind. She looked out the window at the cityscape, expecting nothing, yet dreading everything. The sun had long set, leaving Tokyo a glittering, indifferent monster. She was staring at her reflection in the glass when she heard the smooth, silent approach of engines outside. Not the roar of motorcycles or the squeal of tires, but the low, ominous thrum of wealth and power. 2 massive black luxury sedans, their windows tinted to obsidian, glided to a stop directly beneath her apartment. The rear doors of the first car opened simultaneously, and 4 men, not Kaito's usual muscle, but professionals in perfectly tailored suits, men who looked like they were guarding nuclear secrets, stepped out. They didn't look up, didn't make a sound. They simply moved with purpose toward her building's entrance. A moment later, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed on her door. It wasn't frantic or demanding. It was the sound of a man who knew he would be answered. Maya's breath hitched. This was not a forced extraction. This was a summons. Kaito had ensured she had nowhere else to go and no other choice to make. She walked to the door, her spine rigid, fully aware that this was the final act before the climax, and that she was walking into the mouth of the wolf. She opened the door. One of the men, his eyes as cold and flat as old river stones, simply extended a hand. "The Oyabun awaits, Miss Johnson." Maya didn't scream, didn't fight. Her eyes, filled with defiance and the heavy weight of the secret, met his. She stepped out, closing the door behind her apartment. She was not being taken by force, but by necessity. Kaito had finally isolated her completely, bringing her into his fortress against her will. He had cleared the stage for their final confrontation, and she knew the true danger was not what he would do to her, but what he now needed from her. A second set of men directed her to the rear seat of the lead car, where Kaito Tanaka sat waiting, alone in the cavernous space. The lighting inside the car was dim, emphasizing the severe lines of his face and the unsettling intensity of his gaze. He didn't offer a greeting, merely a statement that cut straight to the bone, perfectly summarizing their shared perilous entanglement. "I need the truth, Maya, and I need you. They are the same thing now." The world had narrowed to the oppressive mahogany and glass of Kaito's private office. Maya stood rigid in the center of the plush, custom-made rug, the silk of her crimson dress feeling like a suit of armor against the paralyzing silence. Outside, the lights of Tokyo were muted, distant witnesses to this final, desperate confrontation. She hadn't been forced here by his guards. She had been brought by his escalating psychological warfare, a move that left her professionally ruined and emotionally isolated, exactly as he intended. Kaito Tanaka, the Oyabun, was not behind his desk. He stood just a few feet away, close enough that the scent of expensive sandalwood and steel filled the air. He was a perfect portrait of controlled menace in his dark suit. Yet the intensity in his eyes, the complex, warring mix of desire, grief, and obsessive need was barely contained. Maya realized the truth of the image they presented. She was the key to his closure, and he was the wall blocking her path to freedom. "It ends now, Maya," he said, the words quiet, but carrying the force of a command that had never been disobeyed. "The games are finished. The resources I have wasted on this vengeance have cost me. You will tell me what my daughter needed you to keep silent." "You want the truth, Kaito?" Maya countered, her voice dry but unwavering. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "You want to know what Sora truly died for? It will destroy you. It will tear your organization apart, and you will find it was your own hands that set the trap." The Oyabun's expression hardened. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, crowding her space, demanding her submission not through a threat of violence, but through the sheer weight of his presence. His power was palpable, yet Maya felt a strange, cold calm. He needed the secret more than he needed her silence. His vengeance had failed. Now he was begging. He reached out, his hand coming to rest tentatively on her shoulder, a gesture that was shockingly vulnerable and possessive all at once. It was not a hold. It was a plea. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, his breath warm. "I have not slept a full night since the moment she died. I tried to crush you, and I failed. You have the one thing I need to live, the only thing I need to silence the ghost. Tell me the truth, Maya. Tell me the secret." His desperation was a palpable, intoxicating wave. She saw her opening, the moment to trade the secret for a permanent vow. "I will give you the truth," Maya whispered, not pulling away, but leaning infinitesimally into his space, letting him feel the cold, hard condition of her resolve. "But the bargain requires more than just my life." Kaito pulled back just enough to see her face, his features drawn tight with impatience and desire. "Name it." "Two conditions," she said, raising a finger for emphasis. "First, you will permanently, irrevocably cease all actions against my community and any connected to me. They are under your protection, forever." He nodded immediately, his eyes never leaving hers. "Done. The protection of the Tanaka name is absolute." "Second," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength as she solidified her position as his moral anchor. "The truth you seek will demand reform, Kaito. It will demand peace. You will use your remaining authority to ensure that my community, and others like it, can operate without the threat of your vengeance or your power. You will become the shield you never were for Sora." For a long moment, Kaito was silent, the silence stretching taut until it felt like a wire about to snap. He was being asked to turn his entire life, the source of his power and identity, upside down. But the need for Sora's truth, the need that Maya represented, was a physical pain in his chest. "A king who cannot yield is no king at all," Kaito murmured, his dark gaze finally softening into something akin to reluctant acceptance. He removed his hand from her shoulder and stepped back, offering a small, decisive bow of the head, a gesture of submission that no rival, no associate had ever witnessed. "I agree to your vow, Maya Johnson. Now give me what I need." The bargain was struck. She took a deep breath, the name of the traitorous insider finally forming on her lips. Sora was killed because of. The word was a gunshot in the sterile office, devastating his world instantly. Kaito's frame went rigid, his eyes wide and hollow, the truth shattering him far more completely than any vengeance could have. Maya had revealed the secret, and in doing so, had bound herself, irrevocably, to the Oyabun, who was now completely dependent on her strength to survive the ruin she had just delivered. The silence was the only thing that moved in the traditional drawing room of the Oyabun's estate. It had been days since Maya had fulfilled her end of the bargain, the truth, delivered in a quiet, devastating confession that had stripped Kaito Tanaka bare. The secret had been worse than he could have imagined, a betrayal rooted deep within his own legacy, and for 3 days He had vanished into the shadows of his fortress, dismantling his rage, and beginning the agonizing work of enacting the protection Maya had demanded. She sat by the shoji screens, watching the faint light filter through the rice paper, her own strength feeling brittle now that her purpose was fulfilled. The community was safe. The promises of peace and reform were already rippling through the underworld, costing Kaito a great deal of face and power. He had chosen her terms, but she had lost her best friend, and she had gained the obsessive attention of a man who now knew her worth and held her within his golden cage. The door slid open, quiet as a whisper. Kaito stepped into the room, no longer wearing the pristine tailored suit of the Mafia's boss. He wore a simple black kimono, his posture less rigid, though the dark, heavy gaze in his eyes remained. He was still Kaito, the Oyabun, but the man who stood before her was shattered, clear-eyed, and newly indebted. He had performed the tasks, but the question of their future hung heavy between them. He didn't move toward her, respecting the final distance she had kept. "The arrangements are complete," he stated, his voice a low rumble. "Your people are untouchable. The men who caused Sora's death have been dealt with my fault, my oversight." He looked down at the polished wood floor. "The reform has begun. It will be slow, but it will be done. I have fulfilled your conditions." Maya watched him, her heart beating a heavy rhythm against her ribs. This was the moment of transformation. She had won the battle, but she had not escaped the man. Kaito lifted his eyes, and they burned with a raw vulnerability she had only glimpsed in the climax of their confrontation. "I did it for my peace, yes," he admitted, his voice roughening. "But I realized something else. You are the only person who has ever truly challenged me, who held a mirror up to my weakness and did not flinch from the consequences. You have a strength I spent a lifetime trying to destroy." He took one slow step forward. "I will not insult you by calling what I feel love in the common way. It is a necessity. It is a fever. It is a devotion. And it is entirely yours." He opened his hand, palm up, in a gesture that asked for acceptance without demanding it. "I asked you to stay, Maya, not as a captive, but as the source of my strength. I do not want to control you. I want your loyalty, your defiance, your truth, at my side forever. Be my equal. Be my partner." He was confessing his desire for her power, asking her to be the queen who would keep the king honest. A single tear tracked down Maya's cheek, but her expression was one of final, terrifying acceptance. She rose slowly, crossing the remaining distance between them. She did not take his hand in submission, but placed her own over it, asserting her dominance in this new dynamic. "I will stay," she agreed, her voice firm. "I will be your equal, but only if you understand that the day you try to take my loyalty by force, the secret of your surrender becomes public." "You answer to me, Kaito." His lips curved into a slow, devastating smile, free of the cruel arrogance that had marked their beginning. It was a smile of pure, dangerous possession, freely given, "as you wish, Maya." He lowered his head and kissed her hand. The most powerful man in Tokyo, bowing to the moral authority of the woman who had dared to stand in his way. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it was a possessive, desperate embrace, sealing the pact. She was his obsession, and he was hers, a powerful, codependent love, where the black woman held the ultimate moral high ground over the Mafia boss. If this shocking twist and forbidden romance thrilled you, let me know. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Smash that subscribe button now also for the next chapter of his daughter's secret, the black woman that became the Mafia boss's obsession.